So what I'd like to do is just start off by going around, getting a sense of who's in the room. We did a little bit of that earlier on, but for this session in particular, that'll be really helpful. You know, if you could give me a sense of whether you've run for office before, whether you're currently considering running for office, whether you've worked on a campaign, or whether you've done none of those things. I'm definitely interested in hearing it, and also just where you go from. So let's start over here.
Hi everybody, my name is Tom Syracuse. I'm not from Syracuse. I'm the chair of the Manhattan local of the Green Party. I ran for the state assembly and the state senate in the past November. I ran for the state senate. I'm hoping to run for city council now. If I can get through all this paperwork.
The finance.
Which is even more complicated than the paperwork for the state legislature. I've worked very hard on the gubernatorial and the presidential campaign over the years.
Right. So you work on any campaigns, you run for office, and you're going to be running for office.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
I am Manuel Lee, former co-chair of Manhattan Greens Local. I don't work on any campaigns other than doing some volunteering for Stein campaigning. Someone's state assembly campaign, and not looking to run for office, but maybe be helping manage a campaign, right, or behind the scenes.
Step up, be involved.
Yeah.
Excellent.
My name is Nick. I have never served on any campaign or even volunteered, but I'm interested in getting involved.
Great.
So,
And you're from the DC area?
I'm from Maryland.
Okay, cool. Very good. Welcome.
My name is Maureen, and I live in Westchester. And excuse me, I've been involved in politics for many years in campaigns, and I'm considering running for office now.
Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm Dan Solomon. I don't have any experience with other than donating money to the Green Party. I haven't volunteered or anything. Just interested in hearing the ideas and seeing what the campaign entails.
Excellent. Where do you live?
Queens.
Queens. Excellent.
I'm Stephen Gallo. I guess when I lived in a New Paltz area, I worked on the Green Party campaign for Alpha Nader, and since then I've been living overseas. I just got back in August, and I'm interested in running for office, but I think at some other later date, since I just came back.
Really get your feet wet and settle in the community.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you mind sharing where you came back from?
Cairo.
Cairo.
So, yeah.
Nothing's been going on there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for whatever you're doing there.
And I'm Pat
Oh,
Dwyer.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, why don't you
I've run for on Long Island. I've run for city council in the city of Glen Cove, and now I'm thinking about running for city council in the city of New York.
Excellent. Where in New York? What borough?
In Brooklyn, near the Verrazano Bridge, in the Bay Ridge area.
Excellent. Good. I like this group. Although I have to say that it's sort of self-selected, so it turns out kind of nicely more than usually. I haven't yet to have anybody show up and say, I have no interest in elections, no interest in getting involved more and stepping up. So, my name is Ben Manski. As I said earlier, my history with electoral politics is kind of long. I'm in my 30s at this point. And I think I worked in my first campaign when I was maybe 10. My mom took me in to volunteer on a campaign of a progressive Democrat who was running for U.S. Senate in Wisconsin. And I actually really dislike elections, to be honest with you. They have some advantages from the standpoint of movement building. Some of the advantages can include the fact that you can go out and build what I call ballot box solidarity, where lots of people can act together even if they don't know each other, and show some collective action in that way. They can be very positive, and then you have a limited term for the campaign, right? So you know that there's an election, and maybe there'll be some stuff that happens in the weeks after the election, if you have a recall or recount, or I should say recount or disputed election. But most of the time, people sign up and they know what they're getting into. But the reality of being a green or progressive or radical in electoral politics is that we're operating in not defined by us. Right? So, this said, despite the fact that I have lots of difficulties with participating in the electoral system in this country, I have worked on many campaigns over the years, primarily as a volunteer, but literally, well over 100. I'm trying at one point trying to figure out what background is. Mostly local elections in Wisconsin. I was on staff in later 2000 with the Midwest Field Director, and also did a lot of work with the party. As an officer of the party, I was co-chair of the National Party from 2001 to 2004. And we set up a lot of the committees and infrastructure that still exists today. So I just say that to say that I've had a chance to see things from many different angles. And I've also been a candidate just twice. I ran for a county board, which is a local office in Wisconsin in 1995. I was 20 years old, and I lost in a recount at 6-vote margin, so it was 49.8% of the vote. And I also ran in 2010 for the Wisconsin State Assembly, and did very well in that race. I'll be talking about it a little bit, so it'll help me to flush out some of what I have to share with you guys today. It was a four-way race in which I took 31% of the vote. The Republican came in third place with 19. Apparently it was the strongest showing for a third-party candidate since 1944 in the state of Wisconsin. So it was an interesting race in a lot of ways. Given what I said briefly about electoral politics, I don't go into an election season like there's always alternatives, and we all are probably involved, almost surely involved in other aspects of social change work in our communities, whether it's public service, or it's advocacy, or it's direct action, or it's litigation, doctrine, whatever it is that we do. And so when we choose to engage in elections, it's important that we know why we're doing it. And that leads me to where I want to start us off with. What's the first thing you do when you decide to run for office? What's the first thing? What do you think the first thing is? Maybe what do you know the first thing is that you do when you decide to run for office?
To let people know.
So let people know you're running. Okay. Any other thoughts? I agree that's an early stage. It's an early step. Yeah.
Well, you have to find out what you have to do with the local board of elections, what kind of paperwork you have to fill out. And
The question of how do you get on the ballot.
how do you get on the ballot?
Okay. So these are two things, by the way, which are on the agenda for this session, letting people know and filing. But what would you do even before you file?
Knowing what you stand for.
Okay, so what are your policies? Right? How about even ahead of that?
Why are you running?
Why are you running? What are your goals? Right? That's the first thing that we have to do. And as Greens, it's especially important for us to understand what our goals are in running, because, as I said, we are generally not people who come out of a political class or who have ambitions to be members of a political class. And from my own history, I grew up in the Democratic Party in Wisconsin. I turned 16 and 18. I sort of a couple-year transition, then I left. But I know all these people going that. I easily could have been one of those people, right? But most people in my experience in the Green Party are not people who even have that background, right? They don't come out of the mechanics of elections and people grooming you to come to power, right? And so if we're going to engage in this, our goals are not generally going to be, how do I get into office so I can build a political career so that I can, carry on the family tradition or do some good things in government or what have you. We generally have some other goals. So what kinds of goals might we bring to a campaign? What kinds of goals do we bring to a campaign?
Like growing the party.
Yeah, so growing the party is usually a big one. We actually have a session today. How do we use elections to grow the party? Especially considering that elections are often not friendly to the party. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think in large, even if it was an intentional goal for the Stein campaign, obviously it had that effect, right? Or, in other words, this would be articulating a alternative language or version of the future.
Okay. So that's even a different kind of goal in a way, right? So you have growing the party, and you might have some measurable outcomes, which you can say, here's how we know that we were successful at the end of the campaign in growing the party. And then another goal might be to, shape the discourse, right? To impact what people believe to be true. And sometimes people call that getting the message out, but I don't tend to like that for various reasons I'll get into. Okay, so we have two goals here. Any other goals we might have getting to the race?
Democratizing our election process.
Okay, that's a good one. So actually changing the structure of election. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think in a healthy democracy, you usually have not 2, but 3 to 4, maybe more parties, and that is actually, I think, America's real deficit as what I would call it an emerging democracy. We are a republic, but I think generally we don't have it as, we have 2 parties that are institutions, and they're much more like official parties. They don't, when you think of them, you think that they stand for tendencies, but not really specific issues. And I think that allows them to switch their positions on a lot of issues, and I don't think when you're voting for either party, you really know what you're voting for.
So we're not just building the Green Party, we're building democracy in the process of
That's how I like to see it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And the reality is in much of the country, we don't even have a 2-party system.
Yeah.
In most of the country, there is no real 2-party system. So for example, when I ran for state assembly, I ran because the seat that I ran for was opening up. The incumbent who had been in there since I was a kid and decided he didn't want to run again. Didn't want to deal with the Republicans who were coming in. Basically, felt like he had done his part. He's a pretty progressive Democrat, good guy overall. Ended up endorsing me at the last minute, which is an interesting process, like the day before the election. But he didn't run for re-election. He had not been opposed in many years, and that's true in most Madison legislative races. Republicans don't run because they get creamed. And the Greens have generally not run because we didn't have the capacity. We just didn't have people who were able to step up and raise the kind of money and organize the kind of campaign necessary. So another goal can be to make democracy work in your area, right? Or to begin to make it work.
Yeah, when you said that Republicans that are in a very small minority in a particular race, they will run because they know that there's no chance for them to get elected. Of course, the Greens generally, almost always face that we're not going to get elected. There are some
At higher level races.
Huh?
At higher level.
At higher level races. And even on, local races, there are some exceptions. As you pointed out, you almost got elected. But certainly here in the city, which is controlled by a very powerful democratic machine. So I think that I'm really glad to hear these responses because it's so easy to get involved, to run, and to get burned out, and to get cynical. And so we really have to have in our hearts good reasons why you should, if you want to run, why you should run.
Which brings me to some more goals. So what should be the number 1 goal when you run?
Get elected.
To win. I mean, honestly, and some places the reality is that elections in this country for Greens and for others, but especially for Greens, are completely different from state to state and from place to place. And so, winning a city council seat in Madison, Wisconsin is a different matter from winning it in New York City. Winning a state legislative seat in New Hampshire or Maine is different than it is from Wisconsin. In Maine, their legislative districts have 6,000 people. Right? Our aldermanic districts have 14,000 people. Right? So we have people who've been elected to the city council in Madison who have won many more votes than Greens who've been elected to the city council, to the legislature in Maine. On the other hand, in California, you have people running for local races where they get 250,000 votes. Right? So it's difficult to, I only say this to say that it's difficult to make blanket statements about anything in terms of the Green Party national, ballot access, what it means to win, and so on. But I would argue that for any campaign, including Jill Stein for president, winning the election should always be a goal. Most of the time, it should be the first goal, right? And the reason for that, in my opinion, is that the electoral arena is very difficult to operate in, and people need rewards in order to continue to participate in it. Think about this way. You are somebody who develops some skills. You get some experience in elections and in public life, right? And you work on campaign after campaign, and you continuously lose, right? Over time, what will happen to most sane people is they'll say, well, maybe there has something else I can do with my time, right? So one of the key questions that the Green Party has to really grapple with is how do we provide rewards for people to continue to do the work and to stay with it and to welcome other people in so that when they come to our party meetings and they come to events, it's a positive experience for them, as opposed to a bunch of burned out people who feel victimized, right? Because this political system victimizes not only the Green Party, but victimizes the majority of American people. It's easy to feel victimized. So, but victims are not very attractive, right? Not very attractive. So, how do we provide rewards? One way we provide rewards is by having a party culture of solidarity and community that is rewarding in and of itself. So, I think thought about this a lot myself. Why am I still here? And it's because of the people that I meet and the people that I'm working with. Never mind the fact that we're right, but just the people who I get to interact with around the country over the years. That's a big reward. Another one is I do have the experience of having seen victories. I mean, in Madison, when I was growing up, I was represented by a Green on the city council. And that was a long time ago. And he's now involved in the Green Party in Washington State. Got 20% of the vote for Congress, Joe Swire, great guy, right? We have, at any point in time in Madison, between 3 and 10 Greens in local office. There were Greens in other parts of Wisconsin. So that's rewarding because you can work with your elected officials and achieve policy gains. So if you don't elect Greens, if you don't win some elections, it does become difficult to convince people to stick around. And I think you mentioned New Paltz, right? So, the example of the New Paltz can be something that's inspirational for people, not only because people won the election, because of what they did afterwards, right? So, goal setting, if you agree that the goal of your race is either primarily or secondarily to win, then that becomes important in terms of the things you decide to do in the course of the campaign. Any other goals?
I'd like to get back to the first goal.
Right.
That the
Before we do that, any other goals we'll have for running? I just want to make sure we get them out all on the table.
Well,
Yeah.
I think changing what the average voter thinks is possible with electoral politics, because I think there's no imagination anymore. And that's something that I think a third party can bring to the table, different thinking, and opening people's minds to different possibilities.
So then why would that be helpful?
I think that would be really helpful because I think a lot of people are really discouraged with their choices, and it's more like, I have no enthusiasm, I'll just vote for who I think will win, instead of being actually enthusiastic about the cause, about exploring something new. Different ideas coming to the table because we're at a loss for new ideas in this country.
Okay, so you're opening some space.
Yes.
And let me just sort of use that to tie in one sort of similar kind of idea that I wanted to bring in here. You're opening some space not only for yourself and your party in the future potentially, so that maybe there becomes that breakthrough moment, not this year, but in the future, right? But you're opening space for social movements. And this is one of the things I tell people in the labor movement. I'm a member of union, have been almost all my life. The environmental movement, women's movement, student movement, all the social movements that make up the broader progressive movement in this country is that without an independent political party that's strong, they are prisoners, right? And so it's not that we're trying to build the Green Party because the Green Party is the cat's meow and we want the Green Party to run the country. It may or may not be true, right? But it's that without a strong Green Party, the labor movement has nowhere to go. And what ends up happening is these movements they create institutions, and the people who run the institutions then have a revolving door with the people who they're supposed to be lobbying. Right? So people go out of the labor movement into a democratic administration, out of the democratic administration into the labor movement, and the labor movement ends up protecting those in power as opposed to those in power protecting the labor movement. Right? So that can be a critical role to running a strong campaign, and so that was the argument I made in my race to the labor movement. I went into the teachers union, I went into the firefighters, I went into the TAA, which is the graduate employees, I went into AFSCME. AFSCME didn't buy it, very partisan. It was the people who run elections there are. But I basically said, look, we're in for a tough fight with Governor Walker coming in. We could see that he was going to be elected. And you need somebody in there who is going to speak in the voice of labor and is going to come out of the labor movement and that you can trust 100%. And if you support the Democrat, you won't have that opening. And it was actually those three unions, the teachers, the firefighters, and the teaching assistants endorsing that race, the first time anyone endorsed outside the Democratic Party, and in a partisan race anyway. And they were the three unions that went into the Capitol, right, when the Capitol occupation began. And when there were people in Democratic leadership who were saying, wait a second, what are you doing? They didn't care. Right? They just said they'd already broken with the Democratic Party in this race, and actually some Democrats had broken with the Democratic Party in this race. And so they had this, I feel like it created a space for them to operate. You've had something, I have one more.
Well, actually, what both of you have said sort of gets into what I was going to say, and that is, there are like here in New York City, we know ahead of time that at least at this point in history, we're not going to win, like in the for the state legislatures, right, state senate or state assembly, or even for the city council. Maybe there might be a couple of races that are close, and so to have that as your primary or secondary goal is sort of, you're fooling yourself, and to tell that to people that approach you and say, well, there's no way you can win. Right. So why should I vote for you? And they say, oh no, they're not going to be impressed with that argument. And then you have, in close races, you have the argument thrown at you, the lesser of the two evils. Well, if it's a close race and the Green Party might make the difference of the Democrat or the Republican winning, and the Green Party makes the difference, well then we're going to get somebody in there that is the greater of the two evils. So I think you have to be prepared to answer these points.
Yeah, and we'll be talking about that question during the plenary later today about this sort of unique challenges of running as a green and being green in this electoral system. We're going to have a discussion on it. What that raises for me is there may be some times when spoiling the election is your goal. Right? I think it should be very exceptional for a whole variety of reasons, but I think it runs counter to our overall message, which is that we're basically trying to create a new politics and a new society. We're not just monkey wrenchers just trying to throw a wrench into the system. But I'll give you an example. When I was co-chair of the National Party, when we set up the Coordinated Campaign Committee, which is the national committee, which I urge people to consider getting involved with, actually, so you can be appointed by your state to serve on it. We were thinking about how can we be strategic and show the value of the Green Party, again, to social movements. And one of the dominant issues at that time was trade. We were still in the post-Seattle era, and the 9/11 era had just begun, but we were still very much mobilized around trade issues. And a vote was coming up in Congress on giving China most favored nation trading status. And so what we did was we went to some people we knew in the fair trade movement. We said, who are the 10 Democrats who are the biggest problem for you? I shouldn't say we, I went to some people I knew. The fair trade. Who are the 10 Democrats that are the biggest problem for you? And they sort of consensus on the list and said that to me. And so then we put out, we made some calls to our local Green parties in those districts. And we put out a statement, and it says, Green Party names names, you know, and these are the 10 Democrats that we will go after and we will defeat if they vote for MFN status with China, most favored nation trading status. And these were all incumbent Democrats who had voted for it repeatedly in the past. We got a lot of media in their districts. We started to recruit candidates. And we ended up only having to recruit 3 candidates because 7 of them voted no on MFN in that next cycle. And then we followed through. And we ran 3 candidates, and 2 of the Democrats lost. Barron Hill in Indiana was one of them. I'm trying to remember who the other one was. He's out of, I spent more time in that race. Just south of Indianapolis, sort of a borderline district. In races in which the Green candidate got more than the difference between the Republican and Democrat. So I just raise that as an example. I think it should be the vast exception, and that's actually the only time that I've ever done that. But I think it was powerful for the steelworkers in particular who sort of liked the fact that we had done that in Indiana and in Wisconsin, other states. So that would be another case. But to get back to this question about running to win, we're talking about goal setting right now. How you communicate your message is another question, right? I agree that, for example, for Jill Stein for president, for us to go out there and say, Jill Stein's going to be elected, we have a plan to win, would have been very foolish, right? On the other hand, you get asked all the time by media, you can't win. Why are you running? And the question is, the question of how you respond to that is one question. But then related to that is, what does it mean to have a goal of winning? Right? Maybe it means that we don't win this time around, we're not successful, but we are able to build the vote totals that make it possible for us to be more likely to win next time around. Right? The Bernie Sanders model, Bernie Sanders, Vermont, whatever you think of as politics, he ran many times before he was first elected mayor, and then before he was elected mayor of Burlington, and then before he was elected to Congress. If he had performed less well each time, he probably would never have gotten there, right? But they did have a plan to win each time, and they knew what it would take in terms of votes, in terms of fundraising, and so on, right, to get to that point. For Jill Stein for president, we had a plan to win, and we really did. It became evident. I sort of started having to put it together in early July, mainly because at that point we were actually starting to get some national media attention, and we had to answer this question more. And also because we had qualified for federal matching funds, and money was coming in a very big way. And so I don't want to be stupid. I don't want to be in that position where we come to September, October, and we could have done better than 1% or 0.5% or what have you. What would we do next? What are the next steps? So we actually had a game plan for that. How do we get to 5%? How do we get to 10%? How do we get to 30%? And it mostly involved, frankly, media buys. What's our media plan? When do we have to spend money in order to make sure that we are able to buy television ads before they're all gone in key states, those types of things. So, again, let's bring it down to earth, bring it down to city council, school board, county offices, and so on. Having a plan to win in these races, whether you think it's a 1% chance or a 50% chance when you get into the race, can be very important because what it allows you to do is to plan out the rest of your campaign. And this is why I'm starting off with goals, right? Why do you set goals? Not so that you can, simply so you can measure the impact of your campaign afterwards and decide whether you did a good job, but so you can come up with your campaign plan, right? If your goals involve building the party, which for Jill Stein for president was always a key question for us, then where do you put your effort? We put a lot of effort into getting on the ballot in some states where we knew we would probably not be able to retain the ballot line that we were pouring money and people into getting those ballot lines, right? Pennsylvania in particular. Illinois, and so on. Why did we do that? Well, in some ways, that process helped to build those state parties, right? There was some debate within Jill Stein for president about, what's the best strategy for building a party for the campaign. There were some who said, let's put lots of our money into field organizers, real regional field organizers, will go out and build local parties and so on. We did do some of that in the course of the campaign. My belief was that that wasn't the most useful thing to do. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but my belief was that the more votes that Jill got and the more prominence that she got in the media, the more that we would be able to attract people to sign up online, and we would bring them on after the campaign. Frankly, during the campaign is not a good time to get people going to Green Party meetings, right? And that what would build a party would be to have a campaign that was taken seriously and that people thought was credible, so they'd say, okay, well, I'm going to get involved in this. But this is a real internal debate, but it had to do with that goal of building the party, right? Having that goal of winning the election, right? What would you do based on having that goal? You're out to win the election. What would that cause you to do next? Somebody raised how many votes you need to win, right? Did you bring that up? Yeah. Well, you need to know how many votes you need to win. There's actually a workshop on that later today. Right? How would you find out how many votes you need to win?
Have to look up the population of the district and how many votes would be the majority percentage or whatever percentage, based on the history of that district.
Okay, so you look at the voter history of the law, right? Where do we get voter history? There's some knowledge in this room about some of this stuff.
For elections.
From the Board of Elections, yeah, this is public information. And again, in different parts of the country, there's different levels of information that's accessible to you. And then if you have money that you raise, or you intend to raise money to pay for it, you can actually add information to that baseline information you get from the Board of Elections. But generally speaking, at the baseline, you can find out who voted in which election. If you're in a state like New York is, and most states are, where you have a partisan primary system, Wisconsin we don't, an open primary system, you can find out which primary the person voted. Right? In Wisconsin, when you go to vote, you're not registered by party. So you can go, you vote in one party's primary, but maybe in the next election you vote in a different party's primary. Right? So we don't have that information. You can find out who are the people who voted in the Green Party primary, who are the people who are registered Green, what elections did they vote in, and then that will help you to understand, well, what's it going to take to win? And the question is, well, what does it take to win? If you have two candidates running, what percentage of the vote do you need? 51. Okay. I agree with that. Although it was pointed out by Mark Dunley, if you look at the workshop says getting 50% to 33%. He pointed out to Sarah and me earlier this week that actually Greens generally need 55 or 60%, it seems like. And thinking back to my race for county board, that was definitely the case. We had a contested election with lots of bizarre absentee ballots that showed up from a nursing home, which I later found out were not the votes of actual voters. So maybe you want to shoot a little higher than 50%, and it's a good point. But say you set your goal at 55 or 60%, right? So then, how does that inform the rest of your campaign?
Well, I just wanted to give a little aside that in New York we have fusion elections.
Yes.
So I think another way of looking is, for example, the Working Families Party. Who's voting for them? They're making a statement that usually it's a Democratic candidate, but they're showing they want these values. And I think that's also something that good to tap into.
You can identify those people and go after.
Exactly. Yeah. There are more potentials. You work on that, and then you could build from there.
Exactly. And that's part of voter identification. So that's another phrase, that's another phrase in elections that, there's a whole lingo to the electoral arena, just like other trades, right? So that's part of the process of identifying first what the universe of voters is, right? So how many voters are there likely to be? And then who are they? And how likely are they to vote based on how many elections they voted in, and which types of elections, and how do they identify?
I just want to point out though that here State, this is not what you said about finding out who voted, say, for the Working Families Party, but we do not have fusion. The Green Party will not fuse with the Democrats, Republicans, or any party that, like the Conservatives or the Working Families Party, that are very closely connected with those two parties. We could fuse with some independent group or non-aligned candidate.
Right, and I think you were bringing up, not to say that fusion is a good idea or a bad idea, but just to say that those voters are people who should be voting green, right? And they, right, so those are people.
Right, that's something, that's a good idea, to find out who voted for the Working Families Party, because they probably, their politics are more in line with the voters, that is, for the Working Families.
Right, exactly.
I'm not saying that the Working Families Party itself, the leadership.
Right, exactly. But it's, I mean, I know enough people in New York to know that there are plenty of people who vote for Working Families Party who should be voting green, and who oftentimes make that move. People that I've known from different areas of life. So yeah. So getting a sense of who those people are. What are some other ways you can engage in this process of voter identification, of identifying who your likely voters are?
I think by area also, what's happening. So for instance, our electoral districts, it depends on what you're running for, but for instance, where I live, my district goes from Queens into Brooklyn into a little chunk of Manhattan, and those are diverse areas, and you have to really assess what is each area, what's important to each little small region or neighborhood, and how can you kind of formulate that together and really create a package for everyone.
So the package will be in response to your understanding of what the demographics and the constituencies are.
Exactly.
Right. So in terms of the constituencies that exist in the district, you'll be looking to say, well, where are my votes going to come from in the district, right? And there will be a lot of different ways that you'll cut those numbers as you're looking at, how we get to 55% or 37% or whatever your target is. How is it that we're going to cut these numbers so that I know that I need to get, 80% of the Jewish vote in my race, right, in order to be able to, that would be like, 40% of the overall vote in this district, right? I mean, I did that in my race. Madison, Wisconsin has 10% of the population is Jewish, right? I'm Jewish. Most people in Wisconsin know nothing about Judaism. It's incredible. We elected 2 Jewish senators and nobody knew it. So they make it a crowd in some ways in Wisconsin, in a lot of ways. Like the first openly lesbian member of the Senate. It's like a weird state, in a lot of ways. But I knew that Jews voted 95%. I knew that 10% of the city is Jewish, and actually on the west side where I grew up, probably more like 25%. I knew that most people didn't know that. So not only did I do some of the things you would normally do in terms of going through, various communities. I mean, I'm a Reconstructionist congregation in Madison, but just letting the word go out that way, and also getting endorsements from Jewish elected officials. But we did television and radio ads in my campaign, and one of them was called 3 Questions, right? And, 4 questions. And so it was basically a Passover reference. Passover wasn't any time nearby. But anybody who was seeing it was Jewish immediately understood, I want to give, kind of thing. And I don't know what percentage of the vote I got was, but I'll bet you it was pretty good. Okay.
So what do you do when you know that, say, a significant portion of your voting base is Jewish or gay, and a significant portion of your voting base is Jewish, and a significant portion of your voting base is not, it does not hold, say, equality or marriage in favor. A whole hunk, like my district was just gerrymandered, and a lot of the South Bronx now is in the state Senate district. It used to be just on the west side. And a lot of people in the South Bronx belong to evangelical churches, both Hispanic and black, and they don't go for gay marriage. Should I avoid that on my in my campaign? And even if I were to avoid it, if a question comes up, what would I say? And what about the stance of either the state committee or the national platform on that question?
So I have a answer to that. I'm wondering what other people think.
Just a question. Is that an issue that people vote on? I always feel like, particularly the Black and Hispanic community, they probably vote more on the economy and on gay marriage. So you can't change. Obviously, you're not going to change your platform, but I still think that they tend to go to the left.
Plus, we already have it here, so it's kind of easy to go to. I mean, we have gay marriage in New York now. So
But I'm bringing that community.
Yeah,
I actually happened to pick on that particular thing, but.
Well, I mean, there'd be an example. So Jill got a lot of attention in Jewish media around the country, and we had a strategy to pursue that. I mean, she's not particularly religious at all, her last name is Stein, and people notice that, right? Jewish doctor, right? The party's position on Palestine, Israel is a position more reflective of the party of that section of the Jewish community that a lot of us come from, not of older Jewish voters around the country. And it's a position that Jill supports. So, we had to deal with that question, right? And sort of my view on this is you're already running green. So you've already made the step across the line here to say, I'm running for reasons other than to do the expedient thing, right? So you made that decision. So these types of questions don't really come up in terms of whether you got the issue or not talk about it. What you focus on is a different question, which we're going to come to in a second. What you focus on has a lot to do with who you are as a candidate, why you're running, right? And also who your, third piece, who your constituents are, right? If you're not going to talk about issues where there's work to be done in the community, then what's the point of being a Green Party candidate in the first place, right? So that's, the reason to look at the demographic questions, though, is that you need to know who the heck your voter base is. In my district, a lot of Hmong, voters, and you have a very large Hmong community, people from Southeast Asia, west of Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, that area. And so, I had, Hmong leadership in my campaign team, people that I worked with, and we made immigrant rights a very strong campaign team, even though it wasn't something that actually particularly impacted the Hmong community in the way that most people think of immigration issues. So, moving from goals into beginning to sort of get a scope of the lay of the land, right? The goals will help you to determine that. If one of the goals is building the party, and you're working to bring in new people, right? You're going to want to have some strategies that are going to get people interested in the Green Party after the campaign. Okay? And so that can be a critical question. My race was successful in helping to rebuild our local party. Our local party had not met in several years, right? In fact, I was the only candidate who ran in Wisconsin that year. So that was a very low point for one of the oldest parties in the country. But several people who worked on my campaign have run for office. One of them serves on the Dane County Board. He's 20 years old, Leland Pan. And so, that was the goal, was to identify people who might come in and run for office and then, be successful in the race too. Another one was to build inroads into various key social movement organizations, right, to get people in labor and environmental movement and the student movement in particular, my race, to break with the Democratic Party and to have some independence. So if that was one of your goals, right? You said, okay, we're building for the long haul. I want to get some of the unions here in New York or some other part of the country to stop just sort of doing whatever the political directors tell them to. Right? How would you do that in the course of an election? You're starting off and you think, okay, I have 6 months or 4 months ahead of me in this election. How are you going to use that as an opportunity to?
Well, I'm a member of the teachers union here,
AFT?
and
AFT?
yeah, the UFT branch of the AFT. Now they're going to have a candidates forum for mayor, and I'm sure that they're not going to invite if our Tony Gronowitz is our candidate for mayor. They're not going to invite him. So I have to go to the teachers union and tell them that if they're going to have candidates for them, they have to get all the registered candidates. I'm not going to see what they do.
What they do with
Because the leadership of the teachers union is very closely tied to the democratic machine. So, but I have to make that effort.
Right. Absolutely. So, what do we hear from that? First of all, we know that Tom is a member of the teachers union. And what might we also want to know if we're building a campaign and Tom's not a key player in it, but he's actually somebody who is an identified Green. We want to know who are the other Green Party members who are members of that union and of other unions in the area, and actually have a list of labor Greens in your community so that you know what you're working with, right? Then what might you want to do? Well, you want to know what Tom brought up, which is, first of all, what is the sort of formal, above-board official process for that union to make an endorsement? You know, what are the steps? Do they send out questionnaires? What are forums? Etc. You also want to know the informal things, like, you know, who are the power players? And I'm guessing you probably have a sense of that. Who are the official leadership and who are the people who are influential within that union? You want to know who are potential allies. And this is, I think, the most important piece in a campaign to get a labor endorsement that ultimately proves unsuccessful, right? If you get the endorsement, that's great. That's great. It does happen in many parts of the country. You know, unions do frequently endorse and back strongly strong Green Party candidates. But the places where they do it, in my experience, are places where there are many identified allies, or I will just call them labor militants, you know, who may or may not be Greens, but basically are Greens, you know, whether they know it or not. And that's really critical. So what we've done in Madison at various points when we've been at our strongest is we've actually had a labor whip. Just like in Congress, they have a majority and minority whip. But we've had a labor whip, because we have a labor council, which is the regional federation of labor unions, just like New York does, and many major cities have labor councils that represent various, that send delegates to represent various unions in the area. And we went through and identified all the people who were delegates to the Labor Federation, we call it SCUFL, South Central Federation of Labor, who were either Greens or who we thought of as allies, right? And that was critical not only for the long term in terms of working to get more people appointed to be delegates who were allies, because a lot of times, some of these roles, it's just like whoever shows up a lot of times until it becomes important, until they discover that you're in play, right? And then also, when you get down to the endorsement meeting, the people who are there actually matters. So, one early victory for us is we ran a guy named Tony Schultz for state senate in Madison 2004, I think. Yeah. And, he was 20 years old, farmer, very charismatic guy, beloved in labor because he'd done all his labor organizing as a student. He didn't run at all. Like, he didn't do, he's like, you can put my name down, and so on. But we were able to get him as many votes at the Labor Federation as the president of the state senate, who had been in office since 1954, based on doing the organizing and making an argument, which was that this incumbent, while generally progressive, had fought us on faculty unionization, the right of faculty to organize at the university, because even the administrators know with us. And so we were able to win that fight, right? So I guess each election cycle is an opportunity to identify the people who are allies, to work with them, to have the discourse, the debates, to force the debate, right? And then also what happens after and between elections is important too. Still with me, everybody? Very good. Let me just see where we want to go here. I'm looking at time. I think we have until 1:45. Is that right? What time do we have until on the?
Says 11:30.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
11:30.
I was operating on the wrong time scale. Okay.
We're running 15 minutes behind, so.
Well, maybe five minutes now. I'll call it right now. So it's good. And then, is that what she just said? She just told me? No, okay. All right. So, okay. So this is a good workshop on goals and identifying some of the things you need to do. But the reason why you start with goals is that when you start the campaign, you should have a campaign plan, whether it's written out or in your head, maybe both, that gets you from where you are at the beginning of the campaign to the end of the campaign, so that you can map out all the steps along the way, right? And things are going to completely change at various points in the campaign. They'll come your way, you'll discover, the day before the election that the incumbent has decided to pull his endorsement of his opponent, so you write up, photocopies, and you get people out to drop these off at 10,000 doors, right, the day before the election, because you want people to know that the incumbent has been disendorsed, right? Those types of things will happen, but overall, you need to have sort of the architecture of the campaign worked out. So what that means is you need to know what the filing requirements are, right, at the beginning of the campaign. You need to know when those forums are, those public events, and you need to have a calendar that's worked out. You need to have a sense of, so what we call those is external events. Those are events that are external to your campaign. You didn't create them, but you need to be aware of them. There are things that are internal to the campaign, like if you know when the election is, then you know when you need to begin your get out the vote drive to turn out your likely voters. Generally speaking, those will start 2 weeks before the election. These days, they actually start earlier because so many people vote early, right? So you need to have that mapped out at the beginning of the campaign. Why do you need to know when you're going to do the get out the vote, the GOTV effort? Because you need to have literature, you need to have volunteers lined up, you need to have enough money to pay for the literature. If you're doing phoning, you need to have money for that. You need to know what phone company you're going to use for doing robocalls if you do that. And I've done it, and I tell you, it's helpful for getting your voters out to the polls as a reminder call. You need to know if you're putting out mailings, when those mailings need to go in the mail, so that they actually get to people before the election and not afterwards. I can't tell you how many elections that's happened, where people put it out 2 weeks before the election, and then it arrives in people's mailboxes the day of the election.
Just a short comment on mailings. The list that the DOE puts out on, say, who's
Board of Elections,
they're woefully inadequate. So you have to, the probability is that the list that you're going to get, half of them are invalid. That's my experience here in
out of date mostly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's a very, if you're limited on funds and on resources and volunteers, you should think twice about mailings.
Just mailing that straight. Yeah. I mean, I think that that's a critical function of the party in many states, is to take that list and to clean it up, right? And, call it cleaning it up, or sometimes they call it leavening the list, right? So cleaning it up is getting the bad information out. Leavening the list is adding additional data to it, right? Data that may come from the party, from past campaigns. Like we have additional information. So we do door knocking in local races. And so people go to the doors and they have the voter list, and then they talk to the person and they write down what the exchange was. And then the next time, 2 years from that, then when there's another race, maybe it's the same candidate, maybe it's a different one, they can look and says, oh, this person said that they're a member of the Sierra, right? Or this person said they're a member of the electrical workers or whatever, right? And so that will be part of that process. So the party has an important role to play as well, especially in questions like that. In terms of being able to have that overall trajectory, from goal setting to identifying universe of voters, right? And coming up with a voter identification plan to identify the people who are most likely to vote for you, to coming up with strategies that you've been put into place over the course of the campaign to achieve certain goals, whether it's bringing in labor or other communities of interest. You're also going to put together a campaign team in the course of the campaign. And it's not necessary to have everybody there from the get-go. And there's oftentimes in the state that I see Greens and just people new to politics thinking that you have to create jobs for everybody, correct? An electoral campaign is not like a advocacy campaign or a community organizing drive in this way. Political campaigns have hierarchies, okay? They have accountability. They have responsibilities. And whether the people are getting paid or, as is almost always the case, they're volunteers, if people are not working out particular roles, then you need to, and those roles are important, you need to make sure that somebody's doing that job that is able to do that job, right? And if there's somebody who wants to help out, but you can't find anything for them other than stamping envelopes, going door to door, making calls, they want to do something else. It's not your job to find them something to do, necessarily, right? I mean, you do want to have lots of volunteer opportunities, but oftentimes people will look at a political campaign as in the same way that they would look at the way that we normally do activism, and you can't do it that way. I'm just going to say you can't do it that way. I mean, we are dealing with. I made this comparison a couple times. Sometimes people look at me strangely, but it's like Spain, 1936, right? We had spanned a civil war. We're up against the fascists. They have tanks and bombers, and we're the democratic forces resisting them. And we didn't set these rules. But there's sometimes when there needs to be somebody who gives the order, and everybody else says, "Okay, we're okay with that. We're going to go along with that." Right? It's a very hostile terrain to democratic politics. The elections are so. It's not as extreme as that. You don't have to worry about German dive bombers, but the long and short of it is that there is accountability. People do have roles, and that it's not about being
drones.
What's that?
Drones
today, exactly. But people do have roles, and definitely you want to be thinking about being a good human being, and also the impacts of not being a good human being to your volunteers and supporters and so on. But when you're putting a campaign team together, you figure out what the needs are and how you're going to meet it, right? And you need the treasurer. Honestly, before you even have a campaign manager, you need a treasurer. And by a treasurer, I don't mean the person who puts their name down, right, on your literature. Oftentimes we have what are called named treasurers, somebody who's well known in the community and respected, so people will say, "Oh, so and so has agreed to be their treasurer." That's a statement of support. But I'm talking about the person who actually does the books. Right? Extremely important. And I've had many problems with this over the years, so I wouldn't say I've necessarily learned my lesson on this. But you got to have a bookkeeper, treasurer who's really able to learn up on the campaign finance requirements and make sure that you're not only that you're reporting any campaign finance filings that you have to report under state or local or federal law, but that you're also keeping up with other filing requirements in terms of registering the campaign, making statements about conflicts of interest, other types of things like that. Campaign manager, pretty important. That's pretty much number two. The campaign manager is the boss. Candidate is not the boss. I'm going to be doing the same workshop twice, the next two workshop sessions, which are titled Being a Candidate. And in that session, I'll talk about the relationship between the candidate and the campaign manager. The candidate has a job. Their job is to recruit votes, money, and volunteers. And that's it. And anything they're doing other than that is not their job, right? From there, there'll be other critical tasks that need to be taken on, of course, the campaign. The volunteer coordinator, somebody to muster volunteers and to get them out and doing the things that volunteers need to do, and rewarding them. You'll have people who coordinate events. So you might have an events coordinator, somebody who just says, well, I can do this. I can put together fundraisers or meet the candidate type events. You'll have somebody who's good at literature design, very specific skill set. You might have, on a larger campaign, you might have a media team, right? Most of our campaigns, we're not going to have that. And it will actually be the candidates themselves who is essentially going to be the spokesperson for the campaign. Right? Jill Stein for president, we invested a lot in media. We put more into media than we did into field, mainly because this is a very big country and we knew there was no way we could have any impact at all in terms of field operations with our budget. So you'll come up with a campaign team. And some of the positions are needed earlier in the process than others. The final piece at the beginning of the campaign is that at the beginning of the campaign, you need to have your story down. And the story is the story of the candidate, of where they're coming from, what the formative, what formed them as a candidate, who they are today, and where they're going. And the job of the campaign is to deliver that story compellingly, repeatedly, in many different ways over the course of the campaign. To change the story some, as things will emerge, as you see who your opponents are and what they're doing, and again, talk about that in the 2 candidate workshops, being a candidate today. But if we had time, I would go through some of the campaign literature I have here from my assembly race. We did 10 lit pieces. We did 4 mailings district-wide. We did radio ads and we did television ads. We raised $60,000 in that race, right? It was a very serious race. And if you look at the way that we developed literature over time, it has a lot of consistent messaging. In fact, this is what we call an intro piece, right? Intro piece is the piece that introduces you to the voters, right? And this was a little innovative. Somebody did a drawing of my life, right? Where is Ben Manski coming from, right? And then we actually did a second intro piece about a newspaper. These are very cheap, by the way, the newsprint, Progressive 77, right? And the whole point of the story was Ben Manski grew up in this district, his values were formed in this district. He's taken on corporations and corporate money his entire life. He's running against a corporate lobbyist for the coal industry. You can trust that Ben Manski will carry forward in his campaign for full funding for public services, taxing the rich to pay for it, and throwing the corporate lobbyists out of the capital. So it's a 3-point policy platform, right? And it's been a little while. But the basic point is the story, where he's coming from, who he is, what he's going to do, where he's going, right? And we delivered that through all the different mediums and interactions throughout the course of the campaign. Because, maybe I'll just end with this. When you're running for office, it's the most important thing that's happening in your life most of the time. If you're a strong candidate, it's hard to describe, but other things take second seat. And that's a hard thing for those of us who have families and jobs, such as most of us, right? But for the people you run into, guess what is not the most important thing to them? Even your supporters is not the most important thing to them, except for the very core of people who are working with you. And so you want them to remember what you want them to remember and to have a feeling about you as a candidate so that you can win them over and get them to make that decision to support you in the race. I wish we had more time. I thought we had another 15 minutes here. I don't think we have that, to be honest with you. So I want to thank you for participating and your contributions, and hope this is a good way to start the day. Yeah, good to meet you guys.